Hello, Fluffers, and welcome back to Fluff It, a podcast for furries by furries. My name is Felix, and I am a purple wolf from Florida.
And my name is Uno, and I'm a green and pink raccoon from the United Kingdom.
And welcome to Fluff It, and to all of our fluffy listeners, welcome back. Today we have a very special treat. Uncle Kage coming on to talk to us on Fluff It.
I'm super excited for this episode, and hopefully the listeners will be too. I'm really, honestly, I can't get my head around the fact that we've managed to get an interview with Uncle Kage himself. So hopefully this will be a really exciting episode.
Yes, the man, the myth, and the cockroach himself. I was super ecstatic that he agreed to come on Fluff It, and thank you so much, Uncle Kage.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, honestly, we can't thank you enough for coming on and doing the interview with us for this episode.
Yes, absolutely agree. Now, Uno, you were out doing something very important while this interview was recorded. So for most of the episode, it will just be me and Kage.
Yeah, I was unfortunately working on a theatre job at the time, so it was such a shame because I really wanted to be here, but also I really couldn't get the time off. So, but that's fine anyway. So it's still really exciting that we were able to do this in the first place. And yeah, really excited to hear how this goes.
Hey, jobs are important. So, I mean, I would have done the same thing if I was in your pause. So, but I am super excited to show the listeners Uncle Kage. So, without further ado, here is our interview. So, joining us now on Fluff It is Uncle Kage. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. We are super excited to have you on Fluff It. Now, my first question is, so for those who might not be familiar with you, what do you do in the furry fandom, and could you explain us a little bit of who you are?
Well, outside of furry fandom, I am referred to as Dr. Samuel Conway. I am a scientist, and I work in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina in the pharmaceutical industry. In furry fandom, I'm known as Uncle Kage. Nobody really knows why, but I am. I have been the chairman of Anthrocon, one of the largest and one of the longest running furry conventions held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania every year. And when I'm not chairing a convention or being a scientist, I entertain myself by being a stage comic. I'm well known throughout the fandom for being a guy who gets up on stage and just makes a lot of noise with my face, and people seem to enjoy it when I do.
Seeing your live performances recently at Megaplex, it was really fun, and it was really amazing to finally see you, because I was introduced to you by my good friend Theolin, who's a mouse in Germany, and he showed me the Uncle Kage story hours at Eurofurence. And when I was going to my first ever FurryCon back in 2019 at FWA, he showed me so this is your first FurryCon video that you did a few years ago at Eurofurence. Now, as most furries know, your fursona is a cockroach. So do you want to share with us a little bit more about why a cockroach, and where did the cockroach come from?
There is a story behind just about everything I do. It's the nature of a storyteller. I was first getting involved in this furry thing back, around toward the end of 1991. It was. I was living in Chicago. Had just got onto Furry Muck, which was the early version of the internet gathering spot for furries. It was barely even called the internet then. And I saw these foxes and wolves and otters and coyotes and things. So I thought, I'll join this. I wanted something that stood out. I wanted something unique. So I bought Peterson's Field Guide to North American Wildlife. And I was sitting in front of my terminal. It was a terminal back then, not a computer. Thank you very much. And leafing through, looking to see what might inspire me. It's a bear, I'm not really a bear kind of person. Badger, maybe that's a possibility. Well, as I was leafing through, I saw from the corner of my eye, crawling across the top of the monitor, the biggest, blackest, ugliest, greasiest Asian cockroach you have ever seen in your born days. And it horrified me. I was viscerally grossed out. So I started waving the book at it to scare it off. Now, on television, when you turn on the light, they scatter in fear. When I waved the book at this thing, it just turned toward me and reared up at me. And I thought, that is a ballsy little bug. Holy crap. And my disgust gave way to this reluctant admiration. And the wheels started to turn. An absolutely fearless little warrior, Asian warrior, a samurai cockroach. And I made a pun on the title of one of my favorite films, Kagemusha, a Kurosawa film. Kagemusha literally means the shadow warrior. And it just so happens that mushi means bug in Japanese. So the character of Kagemushi, the shadow warrior, the shadow bug that is, was born. And he was a cockroach and, well, has been ever since. Kage for short, because Kagemushi is just too many syllables for most people to say.
That's a really fascinating story. And that's the first time I've ever heard about the cockroach origin story. So that's really cool. It's really cool to see a lot of these personas and the furry fandom and how they're very different from one another. My first persona was a tiger, but I shifted from Baron, who's the tiger, into Felix, who's my purple wolf. Now, this is because I felt a lot more attached to a wolf than a tiger. Now, with you joining the furry fandom in 1991, the furry fandom over the years has exponentially grown, especially in the last couple of years with the rise of social media and other ways for furries around the world to talk with another. How did people you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but how did people communicate exactly back when the furry fandom was first starting?
The honest answer to your question, how did people communicate when furry fandom was first starting, was through grunts and whistles followed by cuneiform tablets. Because human beings have been fascinated by furries since the very beginning of human imagination. But to take your question in the spirit with which it was asked, it only started to become known as furry fandom around the 1980s into the 1990s. Originally, if you wanted to meet up with other furries, you had to go to a science fiction convention. There was no really other way. We had no internet back then. There might have been a few telephone accessed computer bulletin boards, which if you were lucky enough to have the phone number and access to, you could dial into, but that was horribly expensive. People would go to science fiction conventions and furries would have furry parties. In fact, that was what most fan groups did. You would go to a science fiction convention, and then at night, people would put up signs, the Jedi party, the D&D barbarian party, the furry party. And you would find groups of people that way. It was expensive, and it was something you generally only could do once or twice a year if you were fortunate enough to have the wherewithal. Then computers came into their own. They started to talk to each other. They were networked. What was first called ARPANET and weird names like that. Time sharing eventually started to be called the internet. One of the first gathering spots on the internet was what they called the MUD, the multi-user dungeon. It was an outgrowth of the D&D world. You didn't have to find a Dungeons and Dragons group. You could find one online. To an extent, it was all text-based. You would log in, and the text would say, you find yourself in a passageway. It stretches north and south, et cetera, and you would input simple commands. And the very next step, you would enter a room and it would say, there is a dwarf in the room. The dwarf has killed you. Game over. And that pretty much was what happened to me all the time. Then folks, and I believe the furries were the ones who pioneered it, said we could do the exact same thing, but make this a purely social gathering. It doesn't have to be hack and slash. As a matter of fact, we'll even disable the commands for kill and attack and rob and all that. So they created a furry multi-user dungeon, but since it wasn't really a dungeon anymore, they came up with playful derivatives of the word mud. So they called it a muck. So furry muck was born. You would log in and the same thing. You find yourself under a bandstand and you would crawl out from under the bandstand, find yourself in the west corner of the park. And my world, here was an entire world full of furries that you could explore. You could talk to people. You could build homes and create objects on. It was the first foray into virtual reality, even though it was entirely theater of the mind. There was nothing visual. It was all text, but it was the beginning.
Fascinating. I remember my mother talking a little bit about the old programming games back then. Now I kind of want to move on to the storytelling. So you do a lot of storytelling, as most fairies are aware, either through Uncle Kage Story Hour, or as other furries will know, that you do short story writing. So my first question is, so everyone for the most part knows about the Uncle Kage Story Hour. How did that start up?
I've always been a natural raconteur, if you will. In other words, I'm a blabbermouth, especially in the bar. I'm the noisy drunk. I was at an early furry convention out on the West Coast. And I had enjoyed some wine, and I was sitting in the lobby, and I was telling a story about something or another. I think I was talking about my job and the awful boss I had. You see, this was back in the very, very early days of democracy in Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain had only just fallen. And here I found myself subjugated by this god-awful woman from Slovenia, and I was absolutely positive that she had been the director of the secret police in that communist country and had fled and come to America and disguised herself as a chemist and was using me to practice her mental torture techniques. I was telling this tale and having fun, and I couldn't help noticing that the more I talked, the more people were starting to just linger, began to gather around me, and the crowd got bigger and bigger, multiple levels. People were sitting down on the floor around me. Others were craning their necks in the back. I thought, this is decidedly odd. They must have absolutely nothing else to do tonight. So I finished my story with a flourish, and everybody clapped. It was quite a surprise. I felt very, very flattered by all that. There was a furry artist by name Colin Crisanti, who was sitting immediately to my left. And I wore a lab coat then, as I do now. And Colin reached up and playfully tugged the sleeve of my lab coat and wide-eyed and earnest said, "Tell us another story, Uncle Kage." And there was a giggle, and that was cute. Well, it was a few months after the convention, I got a phone call from the convention organizers saying, "Could you come back next year and do that as an event?" And I said, "What, bitch about my job?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I guess I could do that." And that was the beginning. That was either 1994 or thereabout. I'm pretty sure it was about 1994. And I've been doing it ever since. At just about every convention I go to, they ask me to get up on stage and tell stories, and I do. Fortunately, enough crap happens to me that I usually get new stories by the time the next convention rolls around.
That's amazing how that started. I mean, that just sounds really awesome. And as a creative writing major at college, I am just so fascinated by how you're able to tell all of these stories, and I'm just engaged, and I just want to know more. I want to hear more, and it's just amazing. My one question with that is, so How do you practice telling stories of yourself? And does this take time? Is there like any improv tips with that?
I don't really practice other than I guess practicing on my friends or locally at the bar. Something will happen, something weird will go on. I'll encounter some situation, and just in the course of having dinner with my family or visiting friends, I'll relate. The weirdest crap happened to me today. And I guess that's my sounding board. If they seem to enjoy the story and I get a kick out of telling it, it goes into the repertoire. If I tell it and they sort of yawn, I generally let it sink to the bottom.
That's a very good piece of advice. And this might be a very similar question, so my apologies. But the one thing I noticed that you do super good at is you're able to take a unscripted situation, such as at Megaplex when someone decided to kind of boo and moan at the Brony comment when you were talking about going to BronyCon, and when someone had a medical emergency at your story hour, and how you were super fast to take over the situation and just be able to improvise through it. So when you do have like interruptions, either of their medical emergencies or hecklers, how do you, for people who are newer to the storytelling type stuff, either if they're performers or doing interviews, what's the best way of getting better of handling situations like that? Or another way of saying the question is, what's the best way to prepare for something like that?
I really wish there was an easy answer to that. It's not the sort of thing where I can say, oh, simple, all you do is X. If that was the case, you would never have to worry about hecklers. You would never have to worry about interruptions. It's simply an old saying, a good comic has to be able to think on his feet because the unexpected is going to happen. I hope it doesn't come across as self-aggrandizing or arrogant if I say it. It's just a natural talent, but it's one of the things that you need to be able to do if you want to be a stage comic. That's why if you ever watch, let's say, an open mic, and you've got brand new comics up there who've got the little card and they're trying to read off their jokes, it doesn't work, because the very second they get lost, now they freeze up and they don't know where to go. You have to be able to do it spontaneously. Now, you mentioned a medical emergency, and you are correct. There was a medical emergency in the front row during my performance. And I will state right now, my initial reaction was absolutely the wrong reaction to have. It was an instinctive reaction because I've been in emergency services for many, many years outside of all of this. And I am a convention chairman. I am hardwired to jump when an emergency happens. That's just part of my wiring. So when people began to show signs of distress and call for help in the front row, I jumped down off stage and ran up to do what I do. As soon as I got there, I realized, okay, that's not my job here. There were other people around capable of handling it. So I very quickly switched to what my job is in that circumstance. I'm the guy on stage. I'm the entertainer. I jumped back on stage, told everybody, nothing to worry about. It's being handled. Keep looking at me. Don't get in the way down there. Hi, look at the funny guy on stage. Let the folks do their work. That's my job. And even though it took me about 6 seconds to remember it, that's what I did.
It sounds like the person is doing all right now, which is great. I absolutely loved it. And I think my favorite part was that little comment that the brony hater mentioned and how you responded to it. I just found it absolutely hysterical how it just like turned on him or her or them extremely fast. So I love that.
I will confess too, that one was not necessarily spontaneous. I had heard people make that same comment about bronies before. Mm-hmm. The first time I made the comment, it was spontaneous, but since it worked, that one I kept in my back pocket. And for your listeners, I'll repeat what was said. I mentioned bronies, which is a fandom almost identical to ours. and somebody made the noise out there, which actually greatly offends me. And I stopped the performance and I addressed that person. And I said, excuse me, I heard a sound that sounded like you don't approve, a sound of derision, a sound of oh gosh, not them. I'm a little confused. I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from. By that sound, what you're telling me is that I have just mentioned someone who is into something, who is a fan of something that you yourself do not necessarily understand or appreciate. And because you do not understand or appreciate it, you feel that makes the other person a loser. Does that sound familiar to you, Fluffy? And that is just about the best response to that, because it is a reminder of who we are and that we have absolutely no right whatsoever to look down our nose at anyone.
Absolutely agree. I mean, that's why I absolutely loved that response. Because I mean, while I'm not a brony myself, I mean, as someone in the furry fandom, you don't want to like look down at someone just because you're interested in this fandom that you're not interested in, because it's basically like what you're taught very young. I mean, you want to be treated like how you treat others like how you want to treat yourself. So you just need to respect people, and you just need to be kind to people.
Yeah. In the early days, and even to a certain extent now, furries used to catch a lot of hell from the science fiction fans. As a very smart person once said, from people who really should have known better. There is very, very little else in this universe as disheartening as being smirked at and being called a loser by a guy wearing Yoda ears.
I mean, yeah, that would not be very fun at all. But yeah, I mean, this overall, just to all of our listeners, be nice. Just don't judge other fandoms. So I kind of want to move on now to your short stories and the stuff that you write. So this was something I actually did not know about till quite recently, till I did your virtual Anthrocon earlier this summer, was that you wrote short stories, and you write a lot of historical fiction, which is one of my favorite genres. Now, the one thing I did want to ask is, someone who is both a writer and a furry, I know that, because I know for me, I want to create a lot of stories with anthropomorphic characters, but not every story will probably be beneficial to have a anthropomorphic character. So what are some tips in making stories where anthropomorphic characters become practical? And how do you determine which stories should have anthropomorphic characters while other stories should just remain with humans?
It's very, very simple. Is your story about an anthropomorphic character? There's a trap that some furry writers fall into. They want to write a story about a tiger. So they take their tiger, Jeff the tiger, and Jeff is he's a soldier, and he is sent to explore a far off land, and he explores the far off land, and at first he encounters a native who doesn't trust him, but then they actually develop a friendship, and that then becomes détente or whatever, and they live happily ever after. Yeah, how nice. Why was he a tiger? What was the point of him being a tiger? If you go through and change the word tiger to dachshund, if you change that to plumber, and you get functionally the same story, then you've done it wrong. There is absolutely no rationale, no reason for him to have been a tiger. On the other hand, if you do that and the story completely falls apart, then you've done it right. You put a furry into the story because it's a story about that furry, a story about that furry's place in the universe. If you've got an anthropomorphic canine, there's got to be a damn good reason for that character to be an anthropomorphic canine. One of the finest, absolute finest I ever saw was a short story written many, many years ago by Todd Sutherland entitled Wings. It is a lost story. I have not found it anywhere on the internet. I only know of it appearing once in print, and that was in a collection of stories put together by the late Fred Patton, I think under Sulphurwolf Press, called Best in Show. And that too itself is out of print. Wings is the story of an anthropomorphic canine who exists to serve as a service animal to a handicapped human child. And it's brilliant. Imagine what you can do if you have a service dog who can not only tell you that the light is red, but can tell you we're at the corner of Glen Echo and Kildare Farm Road. Oh, there's a dry goods store on the corner. Is anything we need to pick up? It was spectacular because we were able to use the dog's senses, the dog's unique properties, if you will. And that was an integral part of the story. There was another one that was written by Tom Nugent called A Patriot's Tale, which is one of my favorite stories out there of all, in terms of, is there any sense in this character being a furry? He told the story of effectively a snow leopard who is living in the American colonies in 1775. He finds himself an immigrant in Boston. People, of course, don't like him. They don't trust him because he's not only is he not Christian, but he's not even human. So he is extremely disenfranchised. And disenfranchised youth tend to be targeted by insurgencies. And these revolutionaries hook up with the kid and they say, we need someone like you to help us with a plan. They needed somebody to hang lanterns in the Old North Church, someone who could move silently on padded paws, somebody who had natural protection against the cold of New England in April, someone who could see in the dark, somebody who could hear if the constable is coming. And not only that, to this day, we all know about Paul Revere and his gang, but history never recorded who hung the lanterns in the Old North Church. The story is spectacular because of that. I could gush all day about it, but I'm starting a very, very long answer to your very short question. And that's it. If you're going to put a furry in the story, have the story be about the fact that this character is furry. If not, you get what the writer Kyle Gold calls a zipperback story. You have a story that is simply a bunch of fursuiters running around.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, I've done a couple of short stories myself, and I want to eventually implement some with anthropomorphic characters. An idea was kind of sparking in my head a little bit because there was a American Revolution story that also happened on the same night of the lanterns about a fourth midnight rider that drowned in the Boston harbor and no one really knows about. There's not really a ton of documents about it. So it's something that I would like to do some more research on, and thinking maybe I could do something with an anthropomorphic animal with that, such as like a crocodile or something like that. So
Crocodiles can swim. You need something that can't swim.
Yes. Or potentially something that killed it. I don't know. But that's a very good point. Now, you might have answered this already, but I wanted to ask about furry media. So what piece of furry media, either if it's a comic, video game, movie, show, book, should all furries watch? What's your favorite furry media that everyone should see?
In terms of animated media, naturally, Walt Disney's Robin Hood has been listed as the gateway drug for many people my age. For the newer generation, the film Zootopia, which I firmly believe was deliberately marketed by Disney toward furries, because the very, very first commercial for it that came out introduced the word anthropomorphic. That's our word. There's no other reason for that word to have been thrown out there if they weren't trying to get our attention. For comic media, the absolute apex of furry comic writing would be Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. It's been going continuously for, it must be more than 30 years now. Heroic Tales of the Samurai, a samurai rabbit. Incredible stories from Stan's ancestral homeland, told with an all-animal cast. And it is done in a perfectly loving style, by which I mean we have a man who has both a tremendous respect and tremendous affection for the myths, legends, and history of his parents' homeland, and that comes through with both the writing and the artwork. Usagi Yojimbo is the top of the list in furry comics, if you ask me.
Okay. I definitely will have to check that out. In a few days, I'm going to be starting back college, and one of the classes I'm going to be having to do is writing comics and graphic novels. And the professor wants us to read a couple of comics, so I'll definitely check that out. Zootopia was, while a lot of people in my family and around me might say that it was Crash Bandicoot and seeing all the Disney and college football mascots when I was very little, going down to Georgia Tech football games, it was really Zootopia that did bring me into the furry fandom, because before that I was kind of interested in maybe doing something with international affairs, global affairs. I was very much into social studies, but then I saw that trailer of Zootopia in the car one day while my sister was doing swim practice, and it just like ignited a spark in my head, like I could actually do this. I mean, people are making cartoon characters and doing a living with stuff like this. I'm very interested in this now, and it slowly snowballed into me being here today, being huge in the furry fandom, doing this podcast. So a big thanks to Disney for doing Zootopia. So moving on to Anthrocon. So a lot of furries know you as the chairman of Anthrocon, which is one of the largest furry conventions in the world. Was for a couple of years. Could you share how you got involved in becoming the chairman and staffing at Anthrocon?
I was approached in the early years of a little convention called Albany Anthrocon that had just started in 1997. It just started in Albany, New York. After their first year, they approached me and asked me if I would be their guest of honor in 1998. I had never been guest of honor before. So I said yes. And I guess this ran afoul of one of my, maybe not necessarily one of my better traits. I have a tendency to stick my nose into things, whether it's warranted or not. Now, I had been volunteering at science fiction conventions since 1980 by this time. So it was coming up on 18 years of convention experience that I had, behind the scenes experience. And even though I was guest of honor, I was watching a lot of stuff they did and kind of wincing a little bit. And I began to hesitantly raise my voice and say, excuse me, guys, I don't want to butt in, but I understand you're planning to do X. Well, I need to tell you, Balticon tried that about 7 years ago, and this horrible catastrophe that you probably did not foresee resulted. Maybe you don't necessarily want to do that. Or you told me that this is what you're planning. I don't know if I'd recommend that either, because, well, more and more they started kind of involving me in planning discussions. And maybe they were doing this with malice aforethought, and I just didn't realize what they were doing, because we got very, very close to convention time, and there was some consternation on behalf of the then chairman, who looked at the finances and thought, this is not going to work. We're already in the hole from the first year. I don't see any way to get out for the second. We're going to have to call it off. But that was very close to the convention, and the staff, in desperation, asked me if I would take over. So I said, well, yeah, it's going to be a little odd if I'm chairman and guest of honor at the same time. But I did. I utilized everything I had learned in helping out at PhilCon and Balticon and Boscon and all of the other SF cons that I've been to. Managed to bring them out at an even keel that year. They didn't lose their shirts. And I told them at that point, okay, now what? If you want to keep this thing going, I'm willing to continue as chairman, but you can't run this like a bunch of kids having a frat party. That's what got you in trouble in the first place. You're going to have to run it like a business. So they said yes. So I founded Anthrocon Incorporated in Pennsylvania, which was incorporated on the 30th of June of 1998. I set up a board of directors, and we had our first convention in 1999 in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and I learned exactly how much that year I didn't know, but I've been slowly learning those things ever since, in the 22 years since that date. I'm very, very fortunate that I am surrounded by what I, without any hesitation whatsoever, will say is the most talented and dedicated and heartful staff of any furry convention ever. I didn't put them together. They just showed up, and I'm very, very lucky to have them.
Well, I want to thank you and every other chairman and the staffs of every single furry con for your dedication in making the furry conventions happen. It is a lot of hard work, and I'm just super thankful that you guys take your time out of your day to make things like Anthrocon or Megaplex possible. And moving kind of to another very important part about furry conventions, and that our non-furry viewers might not know about, is charities. So with the furry fandom with furry conventions having a huge emphasis on raising money for charity, especially with dealing with real life fluffers in the wild and other wildlife conservations or protection services. Could you explain why that relationship between the furry conventions and these charity groups are so important, and what do these donations help with?
The question as to the why question is something we would have to get the good folks at Fur Science in on. They've been doing a psychological and sociological study of furries for many, many years. I think that it's just the nature of furry fans. We tend to be particularly empathetic. We tend to be generous. We like to help out. That's just how we are. Whether furries are people who like to help out or people who like to help out become furries, I don't know which way it is. I just know the end result. How it works is that when we announce the charity, we usually try to select a charity that our folk would have an interest in. So for Anthrocon, for example, it is always an animal-related charity. That's our overarching theme. So why not? We could select other charities, but that's not our thing. There are plenty of other conventions out there who are selecting other charities of their own. Our folk tend to like animals, so we select animal-related charities. And Anthrocon pioneered a system, and I'm gratified that most people use it. We try very hard not to touch the money. in any way, shape, or form. We like the charity to be there, not only so that people can see them, can get an idea firsthand of what they do, but this way, there's no question that the money that is coming in is going where we say it's going. There were conventions in the past that didn't have that kind of transparency. And of course, it pulled every conspiracy theorist out of the woodwork saying, well, how do we know that every dollar I gave you got to the charity? That generally does not happen in our fandom. One, we take pains to ensure that that question doesn't come up. And two, there is so much money that comes in just because the generosity of our folk that I don't think any charity has ever left disappointed and said, gee, we wish we could have gotten more. We playfully say that we get a cruel delight out of watching the charity representatives cry at closing ceremonies. My colleague Pandez at Indie FurCon, in fact, his favorite saying is, we use the tears of the charity to remain young.
I mean, that's a very interesting answer. Thank you so much with that. Yeah, it's always fascinating to just learn about each charity that each furry convention does or is donating money to, and I was super happy that it seems like that at Megaplex people were extremely generous, super quick to donate. I mean, it was just really fun to see that happen. Now, with furry conventions, since you're the chairman of Anthrocon and you've been to tons of furry conventions around the world, for people who might have not have gone to a furry convention yet, what types of things should they prepare to do before going to a furry convention or at a furry convention? Because one of my favorite pieces of advice I've heard from you and other people is the 6-2-1 rule. Are there any other pieces of advice that should be known for people going to their first ever convention?
The 6-2-1 rule bears repeating. It was originally called Passavoy's rule. Dr. Robert Passavoy of the Dorsi Irregulars came up with it. He is a physician. And it states that in order to remain healthy at a convention, you must at minimum afford yourself 6 hours of sleep every night, 2 good balanced meals, and 1 shower. The last one is primarily for us, not so much for you. But as a convention organizer, I have seen it happen. People come to their first convention and it blows their mind. They are suddenly immersed in their dream. They say, oh my God, I have found my community. I have found my people. And they go charging off to have fun. And they go to the dances and they go to panels and they stay up talking with people and they party. Their body is just racing along on excited adrenaline. And in that state, they literally forget to eat. The adrenaline suppresses the hunger response. They're so excited and hopped up, they don't sleep. And usually, because the body is an engine and requires proper fuel and requires a proper rest period, eventually they give out and they literally begin to drop. We get radio calls. There's an unresponsive person in the stairwell, stairwell 3 off the lobby, and we send our folk out there and there's a person lying on his face. We roll him over, we slap him awake, and the first question is, when did you last eat? And that's when the brow furrows and you see them starting to do the math. Let's see, today's Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday morning. Yeah. Look to your health. Number 2, yes, this is your world. Yes, this is your community. But every community has members that we perhaps would rather don't show up. Do not become unwise just because you are suddenly immersed in your dream. This is still an event that draws members of the public. We can't do a background check on everybody who comes in. Keep a hand on your wallet. Don't put your camera down and walk away from it. The usual things. We are a wonderful extended family, but every family's got that Uncle Frank guy that they really wish didn't come to the family reunions, but he does, and you have to let him in because he's family. Other than that, be ready to have fun. And if you're nervous, if you're shy, if you're hesitant, just remember, this is your dream. This is your community. Talk to people. Go to the programming events that appeal to you. That's your hobby. That's your thing. You're going to be surrounded by people with exactly your same hobby, your same thing. And have fun. That is why we work ourselves so hard. That's why we drive ourselves to exhaustion. We are doing it because our purpose is for you to find your place in this community and to enjoy yourself. If you don't do that, we feel like we haven't done our job.
I think that's a very great answer. I mean, the fact that, I have had a blast at each furry convention I've been to so far, and I am so looking forward to the many more that I'm hoping to go to. And I know Uno has not been to a furry convention herself yet, and we are looking forward to the day where she can finally go to one. Super excited about that. Now, with Anthrocon in next year, so you've mentioned at Megaplex that you at Anthrocon in the city of Pittsburgh have thought about doing something that's very new and very exciting. Could you give us a little hint of what that might be or what to expect with Anthrocon next year?
Can I give you a hint? Yes, I can. Can I give you details? No. The reason is when something is still in the planning and considering stage, if you tell people what you want to do, that very quickly becomes they heard you promise you're going to. And thus, if I get there and find out, no, I can't have private fireworks displays every hour just for furries, then they get all upset. Oh, Uncle Kage said that's the reason I went. So what I can say is this. One of the showpieces of Anthrocon, one of the things it is known internationally for, one of the things that sets it aside from all the other furry conventions is its fursuit parade. The fursuit parade, by design, goes outside and is greeted with tremendous enthusiasm by the people of Pittsburgh. The very first year we did it, the city estimated a crowd of 5,000 was out there just to see our fursuit parade. The entire city gets into it. Anthrocon long ago stopped being entirely a private members only event and became de facto a citywide festival. So even while you still need a badge to get in, there is so much that we do in conjunction with the city. And what I'm trying to do next year is working to expand on that, to take even that to the next level. And as I said, it's in the planning stage. We have to consider the vast gulf between my dream and the possibilities that the city can offer. And of course, budget. 2022, we are going to be back, but realistically speaking, we do not anticipate having our full complement of members. That's just the anticipation. So we are going to be somewhat limited on budget. And I've told this to the city, and I've mournfully with the back of my hand to my forehead, said, "Oh, if only there was a source of funding, perhaps an arts grant or some such that could help us make this incredible thing that we want to do for the city happen." That's the stage I'm at right now.
Yeah, no, it sounds incredible. I mean, my hope is to attend Anthrocon next year, and I'm talking to Uno that might be the first ever furry convention that she ever goes to. So we're very looking forward to Anthrocon next year and what's going to happen. So we're super excited.
I hope you can make it.
And before we end the interview, I wanted to ask a few questions about wine. So a lot of furries know that you're very keen with wine and very much loving your wine. And I've seen on YouTube that you do wine streams. So to our listeners, how could they find you and support you on these wine streams?
Well, the streams are done periodically, typically once a month, but not on a set schedule, almost always on a Saturday evening. My YouTube channel is not hard to find. It's youtube.com/Uncle Kage, and then /live when I've got the stream queued up. If that doesn't work, I don't know what to do. No, I typically will announce the streams on Twitter, which is, I think, really the only social media that I use. Other than that, I will set the stream up usually a week in advance. So if you periodically check Uncle Kage or youtube.com/Uncle Kage/live, you will occasionally see, streams scheduled in 5 days, and then you'll know.
Thank you so much. And then my last question is, I've heard from Megaplex your favorite wine, but I also want to know what is your least favorite wine out there.
The playful answer I typically give when people say, "What is your favorite wine?" is the one in my hand at any given time. The honest answer, and again, my taste in wine is very, very narrow. I don't like red wines, for example. I like almost entirely white wines, with very few exceptions. For white wines, my wine of choice is a German Riesling wine, Cabernet vintage, grown from grapes grown in the Mosel Valley, no older than 3 years. That's my wine of choice. German Riesling Cabinets Moselland, no older than 3 years, because white wines do not age in the bottle like reds do. Now this is white wines. I'm also very, very fond of sake, but on my YouTube channel, I have an entire 15-minute instructional video describing how to tell good sake. It's not the sort of thing I can just cover right now. My least favorite wine in the entire known universe and a few of the not yet discovered universes is Chardonnay. Chardonnay is an abomination before God and man. I think it was created by my old boss, the old chief of the Slovenian secret police, who came over here pretending to be a scientist in order to torment me with her torture techniques. She's the one who came up with Chardonnay. It's like putting the devil's own anus in your mouth. Why would anybody do that? You might be able to see that I feel very, very strongly about it. Yep. That's my opinion.
Yep, I have not tried either yet. I am 21 years minus a month, so I'm super close to that 21st birthday. The joke in my family is that if Braincott is served, it gets tossed out of the front door at Christmas, which has actually has happened before in the past when we've played cards. But thank you so much again for coming on and doing this interview, Uncle Kage. And if I attend Anthrocon next year, or if I see you next time, I would be more than happy to buy you a glass.
I am more than happy to accept that very generous offer. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's been an honor, and it's been a blast hearing from you. So that wraps up our interview with Uncle Kage, and that was a super fun interview.
We hope you all enjoyed listening to this. That was really interesting and really exciting to hear. And hopefully everyone found it as interesting as we did to record.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. And to give an update about Anthrocon, we can confirm that Uno and I both will be in attendance in next year's Anthrocon. So we are super excited to be going to Anthrocon and super excited to see Uncle Kage once more.
Yeah, this is going to be my first time at a furry convention and my first time in the United States. I honestly can't even describe how excited I am about that. It's going to be amazing. It's just going to be such an experience. I really can't wait for that. And hopefully to meet Uncle Kage and to meet maybe some of the listeners as well. That's going to be amazing. I
Yes.
really can't wait for that.
Yeah, I would love to see some of our listeners. I mean, I know I'm going to be seeing Uncle Kage because I owe him a drink. So, and he is not going to let me go on that so easily. But to all of our listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in, and a big thank you to Uncle Kage once more for coming on. It means a ton, and I'm just super ecstatic that this opportunity happened.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to Uncle Kage for doing the interview, and to everyone who's tuned in and listened to this episode and who's been listening throughout all our episodes so far. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yes, big thank you to our listeners, and especially those who have been listening to every single episode. It means a ton. But until the next episode of Fluff It, have a fluff-tastic day and stay fluffy.
We'll see you all soon. Goodbye.